Virginia Department of Corrections, Red Onion State Prison. To accept this call, press 0.
This is Randall Via, and I'm currently serving 1,214 years for capital murder in Red Onion State Prison in Pound, Virginia, in the USA. Welcome to my podcast, Red Onion Randy. I hope you enjoy listening to me today. Today, I'm going to talk about Red Onion a little bit more. I'm going to talk about Red Onion, how it was when I first came up here to how it is now, in the evolution of Red Onion. To start off, when I first came up to Red Onion, man, was it crazy. I was on a bus with like 30-some other guys. One of those big prison buses, white and blue, and, it's got the bars on the windows and everything, and we're all in there shackled and handcuffed to chains and, our wrists are chained to our waist and all that stuff. And so we're all on there talking and everything, and we pull up to the prison, and we pull around to the back and everything, and we sit outside the back gate for a couple of minutes so they can get security from the buildings and everything back there, the processes and whatnot. And so we pull in through the first gate, which is a sally port, and then they close that first gate behind you, and then you got COs go, and they look underneath the bus with mirrors and stuff to make sure nobody's trying to smuggle themselves in, or there's no bombs or guns or anything of that nature, contraband or whatnot. And then once that's cleared, they open the second gate, and then you pull on in, and then they close that second gate, and then you're in this, sort of like small parking lot on the back of the building. And when I got there, you had like 6 or 7 COs standing on the roof of the building, all holding 12-gauge shotguns. They didn't have real live ammunition in it. They had rubber bullets in it, though you had the guard tower right there behind the fence on the other side, and that person was standing out there with a live AR-15. And you had like 10 COs with canines, and they was all out there to intimidate you. And then you had the major, which was Cowboy Fleming back in the day. And I kind of liked old Cowboy. Cowboy told it to you straight. He didn't mince words with you. And, he got on there, and he was, boys, welcome to Red Onion State Prison. This is unlike any prison you've ever been to before. We run this prison, you don't. You will do what you told, or we will beat your ass into the ground. You have no rights up here. There's nothing you can say or do to ever get rights up here. We don't care about you, we don't like you, and we're going to make your lives miserable. Do I make myself clear, you punk-ass some bitches? And he just started cussing us. I'm not going to repeat all that because I don't like cussing no more. But it took him a good 5 minutes, though, and it was pretty colorful. I got to give him that. And once he was done, y'all understand, some people said, yeah, some of us just kept our mouths shut and looked at him. You had 1 or 2 that just were laid back in the seat daydreaming because they weren't paying attention to him. And then, he started calling up guys one at a time, and the COs would grab you, and they didn't let you walk off the bus. They grabbed you by your arms as soon as you bent down to dip your head underneath the door. They grabbed you by your arms and just drug you off. They didn't quite put you in the concrete, but it was damn near close to it. And then they drug you in. You really couldn't walk. And the shackles would be so tight on you that they would just slice through, the skin around your Achilles tendons and your ankle bones and everything, and you'd be bleeding down into your socks and shoes. And they was dragging you really fast, and they drug you right through a gauntlet of the dogs. Now, they didn't let the dogs bite you, but they would let them lunge at you to try to intimidate you and scare you and everything. And the whole time there, you had multiple guns pointed directly at your face until you got into the building. And then they took you into the building. They walk you down this long hallway to this room. It's called receiving and discharge. And they got a couple of cells in there with a couple of shelves, and they got your bags of clothes and sheets and a little bit of hygiene and stuff that you're going to need there until you get your personal property and everything. So they throw you in the cell, and they start to take the stuff off, and they got the biggest COs that work up here doing this because they want it to be an intimidation factor. There's some guys that came up here, like if you come up here back in the day, if you came up here for assaulting a staff member or something like that, they beat your ass. Like, while shackled and handcuffed, they just beat your ass in that room because there's no cameras in those rooms. And that happened quite a bit. They'll take the shackles and the cuffs and, the chains and everything off of you, and then they'll close the door, and then you got to take your clothes off. And then you got to, run your fingers through your hair, which back then we weren't allowed long hair. You had to basically keep your head shaven almost. And then you have to lift your tongue up. You'd have to run your fingers through your cheeks and spit out, to make sure you don't have anything in your cheeks like a razor blade or a handcuff key or something of that nature. You'd have to lift up your arms, run your fingers through your underarm hair. Then you'd have to lift up your penis. Then you'd have to lift up your nuts. You'd have to run your fingers through that. Then you would have to turn around. You would have to lift up your feet and show them the bottom of your feet. Then you would have to bend over at the waist and spread your ass cheeks. Some people did it. Some people didn't. Then if you had tattoos, they would bring the camera in and they would sit there and take pictures of your tattoos. After that, they would, you would have to throw your old clothes and stuff out to the trace lot, and then they would give you new clothes, and then they would cuff you back up, shackle you back up, and they'd take you over to the building. And once you got to the building, you would have to kneel down on the floor so they could take the shackles off. And they used to not do that. But the reason why they started making you kneel before you take the shackles off is because of this dude named Grimes. I can't remember his first name, but guys called him Ninja. That was his nickname for a while, and then he was Muslim for a while, then he was homosexual for a while, and then he went back and forth and bounced between his different personalities. But I've always called him Ninja because that's what I really knew him by when I first met him. And he claimed he knew karate and he was this black belt and, he was this badass and blah, blah, blah. He really wasn't. He knew a few moves, but, yeah, it was kind of pathetic if you actually saw him practice it. And but one day the COs took it off, and while the CO was kneeling down, he lifted one of his legs up and brought it forward and then swung it back, and he caught the CO right in the nose and the mouth with the heel of his foot and busted him up a little bit, and they beat the hell out that boy. I mean, they beat the hell out of him. Put him in 5-point restraints. And 5-point restraints is where they strap you to a bed. They strap your legs down, your ankles down, they strap your thighs down, they strap your waist down, they strap your chest down, they strap your hands down, and then they strap your forehead down. And then they beat the hell out of him some more. So that's the reason why, when you're in SEG now, to take shackles off, to put shackles on and to take them off, you have to kneel down, and then the CO kneels behind you and puts them on you, and then they help you stand up. So once you got into the building and everything, you're in the cell, and then they went and they did everybody else, and then, you have to wait like a week or two to get your property. So you're in that cell at first with literally nothing in that cell at all, nothing to read, no TV, no radio, none of that stuff. And it was rough time. I mean, it was very rough time. But the food was good up here. I'll say that, man. When we first got up here, the food was incredibly good. Oh, my goodness, it was good. But it was the wild, wild west. I mean, you heard the guns shooting every day. I mean, it sounded like Vietnam up here because it was wide open. The COs were attacking inmates. The inmates were attacking COs. And back then, we didn't have the big 13-inch TVs that we now have. We had the little small 5-inch TVs. Most of them were black and white, and for those guys who had money, they had a little 5-inch color TV, a little Magnavox. For a long time, I didn't have a TV, but I was able to get a black and white eventually, and they have an adapter on the back of it, and that adapter has a solid metal core of these. It's not solid, it's just a bunch of little metal plates intertwined together and like glued down and taped, and it's really hard. So guys would drop that in a sock or a pillowcase or a laundry bag, and they would just run up and they would just start smashing the CO in the head and face with it, or they'd smash another inmate with it. So, I mean, it was constantly fighting up here all the time. So it was really, back then, it was really along the lines of a war zone. It was them versus us. It was crazy back then. I mean, it was freaking wild. You had to fight. Like, if this happened a lot of times because if you go back and you watch Solitary, look inside Red Onion State Prison, you'll see me out on the little small rec yard in between the buildings, in the cage out there where I'm doing front kicks and some other stuff. Well, when the place first opened up, they didn't have those cages. They would take 3 guys from SEG and put us out there. And they would put one person out first. They would take the shackles off, and then they would take the cuffs off through the trace lock. And they would tell him, look, go line up on the other side, put your hands up against the wall and face it. Do not move. If you move, you're going to get shot. And then they would put the second person in there. Then they would put the third person in there. And once they got all 3 people in there and everybody was unsecured, they would lock the door, and then you would get your little hour of rec. Sometimes you would get wrecked, sometimes you wouldn't. It just depended on whether they felt like pulling it or not. And a lot of times they didn't feel like pulling it, so the guys who were man enough that weren't scared to go out there, they would just pay them extra trays to just lay it down for the day. And a lot of guys took them up on that offer because even though you could buy commissary back then, you could only buy a little bit. I think it was maybe $20 a week that you could buy. But so getting those extra trays, and the trays were really good back then, under Wade and McKnight, but you'd stay in the cell for it. But like if they heard me and my neighbor or somebody else in the pod arguing with one another, I'll whoop your ass, you ain't nothing, blah, blah, blah. The COs would be like, man, come here and cuff up. And they would cuff you up, and then they would go and cuff the person you're screaming at, you're beefing with, and then they would march y'all outside. And they would go out there and take the cuffs off of y'all, and they'd make you fight. And you either fought or you bitched up. And if you bitched up, the dude that wanted to fight, they would just put him back in the cell and nothing would happen to him. The other dude that refused to fight, that was scared to fight, they would drag him back into the pod, and they would shame him in front of everybody. They would call him all kind of bitches. They'd slap him upside the back of the head, and then they would make his life miserable. Like, they would buck on his trays. They would go in his cell and shake him down on a regular basis. I mean, if you was a bitch back then, they made your life miserable up here because the COs were always fighting. Hell, I even remember COs would square off against COs in the pod. I remember 2 sergeants. I think it was Sergeant Fleming and Sergeant Owens back in the day. Neither one of them no longer work here. But Sergeant Owens, this little short, chubby dude, but evidently this bastard had like a 12-inch hog or something. And he was very popular with the women up that worked up here and that didn't work up here. And I guess Fleming was just a normal guy like me. And Owens was sleeping with Fleming's wife, and Fleming found out about it. And they got to arguing in the pod, and they almost got to fighting in the pod. You know, and that was just, man, Sergeant Owens, man, and Bastard was a playboy. I mean, he slept with so many COs' wives, it was ridiculous. Sometimes when you spend time around the CO, or the CO spends time around you, sometimes, man, regardless of best intentions, a friendship develops. So you'd have some COs that would start doing stuff for guys. You know, you had some COs would bring stuff in, like cigarettes or chewing tobacco, or they'd bring food in, you know, just little stuff like that. You know, it didn't happen a lot, but it did happen. As a matter of fact, I actually had a CO one time brought me in a baggie of barbecued deer jerky. Oh, my God, that was so good. I still daydream about that sometimes. It was so good. I haven't had jerky in I don't know how long, and it's one of my favorite things to eat. Now, like, that's how Red Onion used to be, you know, so they would go out and they would fight each other in the parking lot, and look, it was violent. I mean, I've literally seen COs in the booth. They would pop an inmate's door and sag, and the dude would pop his head out the door. He wouldn't step out the door or nothing. He would just pop his head out the door. I'm like, yo, what's going on? Get back in that cell, get back in the cell. I am in the cell, dude. Come on, man. You pop the door, man. I mean, and then you would have the back door would open up, and you would have like 20 COs in riot gear, or you would have a couple COs with the K9s, just depending on how they wanted to do it. And they would run. I mean, they would bum rush that cell, man, like a pack of wild dingoes. And they would just tear dude's ass out the frame, or the dogs would. I mean, like, that's how it was. And same thing, man. You know, when that dude would eventually get out, and he would go to the yard, man, he'd get a couple of his homeboys, and they would go bum rush the CO and beat the hell out of him or stab him up. It was wide open back then, and like if you remember from the beginning of the episode when I talk about they had the 12-gauge shotgun standing on the roof with the rubber pellets. It was buckshot. It was just instead of made from steel ball bearings, it was made from rubber pellets. And you know, dudes were getting shot. I mean, they would have to take you over to medical because it has so much force that it would go right through your clothes and just lodge in your skin and your muscle. You know, not deep. They could pluck it out with a pair of tweezers, but that's what they would have to do. And there were guys up here that lost their eyes. You know, some would lose one eye. A couple of them lost both eyes and were blinded for life. Like, Red Onion was hell on wheels back then. And then things kind of started to change a little bit because it was so wide open up here that they had to cut population out. They had to stop population and just make Red Onion an entire segregation camp. And then they had two pods. They had one pod, it was one pod, and that was A1, and they brought a bunch of level 1 and level 2 inmates up here, and they had them working in the kitchen and laundry and doing all the cooking and cleaning and maintenance and everything up here, while everybody else was just straight up solitary. And you had 3 little small pods called progressive housing. And once you got released from solitary, you would do 3 months on the bottom tier in phase 1, and then you would go upstairs and
You have 1 minute remaining.
You would go upstairs and do 3 months in phase 2, and then you would be put in for transfer, and like 2 or 3 months later, you'd get transferred down to Sussex 1. But unfortunately, that's all my time for this episode, so this is going to be part 1 of part 2. I'll talk about how Red Onion has changed for the better in the next episode, and for those of you who listen to me on Apple Podcast, I'd appreciate if you would review me and rate me, preferably 5 stars, but I'll take whatever you think I'm worth. Don't forget to check out my website, redonionrandy.com. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you for using GTL.